At the time, I was trying so desperately to pivot to make money because we weren't making money selling the cars. Being who I am, I tried to make that work, and we tried pivoting. We made some changes. We thought, okay, we could do this and we could do that. I remember, having conversations with you as we were literally bleeding money at that point and going, we need to do something different because this model simply isn't working. Every day that we were open, we were literally digging ourselves deeper and deeper into debt.
We tried to really keep our costs low. So the house that we purchased, I remember we specifically purchased a house that we could pay for the mortgage if only one of us was working. And we could be working essentially delivering pizzas in the evening on top of our regular job and be able to afford that house.
When there isn't any money and you're burning through money, it causes a lot of stress, and it causes stress in the business. It caused stress between you and I.
I do think that it's important to note that it made us enough money that we could live. We didn't have expensive cars and expensive stuff. I mean, I'm not complaining at all. I was very, very comfortable and very happy. So it was just nice to have that flexibility and the freedom that we felt being entrepreneurs, where when you work for someone else, taking a sick day, taking a vacation, staying home with a sick child, that can be kind of painful.
I remember talking to the team, and I'll never forget, we had a leadership team meeting, and we're talking about some of what my thoughts were, and when the leadership team looked at me and said, this is a good time for you to leave. Part of it was, oh my gosh, my kids just told me I need to move out of the house. Hi, and welcome to the Business Alchemy Podcast. I'm Jonathan Mast, and I'm here with Beth Mast, and today we're going to be chatting with you about pivoting with purpose, adapting your business strategy to change. If you're an entrepreneur, you know that change is part of life. In fact, it's something you better get used to because it's going to happen. And today, Beth and I are going to talk to you about some of the change that we've been through over the years, some of the change that maybe happened a long time ago, and some of it which has happened pretty recently, and why that's happened, how we've dealt with it, and things like that. So Beth, as we dive in today, where do you want to start that discussion?
Well, hello, Jonathan, and I would like to start this discussion way back to a business that we first started together many, many years ago. I kind of feel like, it's Voldemort from Harry Potter, the business that shall not be named. Because it was not a very pleasant experience for me per se. And I think in the end, we learned a lot from it, but it didn't go the way we wanted. But I think there's some valuable lessons to be learned from that. Can you kind of talk to our audience a little bit about what you were thinking when you came up with the business idea that was essentially a used car dealership in a way?
Yeah, so I thought it was brilliant, first of all, as most of my ideas, and I found out that maybe I wasn't as brilliant as I thought. So I'd been working in the IT field, had decided it was time to move on from the company I was in. I really wanted to do something on my own. I didn't want to work for somebody else. And this was back in the early 2000s. The internet was obviously relatively new. We were kind of just through the dot-com bubble and all that. And one of the things that was really, really hot at the time was eBay. And you could buy and sell anything on eBay. And I've always had a passion for cars. I thought they were fun and everything else. And I thought, I found some other dealers that were selling cars via eBay. And the thing I liked about it is a lot of the things that about a normal dealership that I wasn't interested in, being there late nights, being there on the weekends, all that type of stuff, most of that went away because the way this business model worked, and I looked at a number of them, is they basically had a warehouse and they bought used cars and they had the used cars in the warehouse and they had appointments that people could come and go ahead and look at the cars and everything else. But it was very different. It was very internet based versus local based. So, we didn't have big banners out front about the latest car sales and all that type of stuff. Literally, the cars were there and were listed on eBay, and we sold them via eBay. And I thought this was going to be an amazing idea. I thought it was really my first time running a business, and I thought it'd be a lot easier than it was. And I couldn't have been more wrong in most ways because that business ended up being a total flop, cost us a lot of money, did not work out anywhere near we thought, and definitely because at the time I was trying so desperately to pivot to make money because we weren't making money selling the cars. I had miscalculated the eBay fees and not understood how much they were going to take and judged how much profit we'd be able to make on the cars. So when you make less money when you sell a car and you pay eBay 5 times more than you thought you were going to pay eBay, we pretty much realized pretty quickly when we'd sell a car, eBay got 90% of the revenue in the profit, and there was just a little bit left, and that didn't cover operations and everything else that we were trying to do. So, being who I am, I tried to make that work, and we tried pivoting. We made some changes. We thought, okay, we could do this and we could do that. And we ended up, after a period of time, with a business that looked less like a internet-based used car dealership and a lot more like an auto repair shop. And that was not where we intended to be. And I remember, having conversations with you as we were, literally bleeding money at that point and going, we need to do something different because this model simply isn't working. Every day that we were open, we were literally digging ourselves deeper and deeper into debt every day that we were open. And on top of that, we weren't really having very much fun either. I mean, I enjoyed buying the cars and I enjoyed selling the cars, and everything else pretty much was a royal pain in the butt.
It definitely turned out to be a lot more money than we expected. It turned out to be a lot more paperwork than we expected.
Oh, yeah.
And finding the clients was not as easy as I think we expected. And
Correct.
so we had to pivot pretty quickly. But lesson learned there in that you really need to have a good business plan and have a budget. And here's how much money I'm starting with. Here's how I'm going to use that money, and just work through that business plan. And at the time, I'm not sure that you wrote it. I do remember you wrote a business plan, but at the time, I'm not sure that it was really based in anything other than the fallacy in your head. There wasn't, the monetary basis and the strong financial kind of boost to it. So we ended
Well, I
up
think,
taking a lot of money
yeah,
personally, obviously, and investing all that into the business.
had my assumptions been correct, we would have done just fine. The reality is my assumptions were way off, and the research that I'd done, surprise, surprise, those people I talked to that were doing it inflated the amount of money that they said they were making on the deals and all that. And the reality is I realized that I didn't know the used car business. So, my thought was, okay, this will be great if somebody, and this was back many years ago, but if somebody wants to buy a Honda Accord, I'll literally be able to take that order from them. I'll go find them the perfect used Honda Accord that meets all their requirements. I'll buy that at the auction. We'll bring it back. We'll clean it up. We'll make sure everything's running well, and then we'll sell it and we'll make a nice tidy profit on the deal. And they'll still get a car for less than they could buy it from any other dealer. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize that ultimately wasn't going to work out the way we thought, and that the costs would just far overrun what my thoughts were. And as I'm sure others that are listening can relate, when there isn't any money and you're burning through money, it causes a lot of stress, and it causes
Mm-hmm.
stress in the business. It caused stress between you and I. I remember basically pleading with you to come help because I needed help to figure this out, and you did, and you jumped in, but that obviously caused issues too because that was our first opportunity working together,
Yeah.
and it didn't necessarily go very smoothly. I mean, there were
Mm-hmm.
a lot of days when I think both of us were probably like, "What in God's name are we doing?" And finally, we, and I say mainly me, you probably understood it sooner than I did. Finally, I was able to address the fact that okay, this isn't going to work, and we need to pivot. And we were blessed at the time to be able to sell and minimize our losses. We still, it was painful. I'm not going to say it was easy, but we were able to kind of do an asset sale and at least get a little bit of money back out to cover some of the debt that we'd taken on at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of those lessons that we learned from that process, I think, is one, do something that you enjoy, that's fun, but also do something that you know that you have
Yes.
experience in and background in. I think those two things right there would have probably caused us to do something different. Although you did like cars, you were reading tons of car magazines at the time, so you were fascinated with that concept. But it was a whole lot more than just sales to it, and that caused a lot of issue as well. So I remember coming out of that experience, and we basically came up with three things that we were never going to do in the future. Do you remember what those three things were?
I do. Yeah. We were never going to have employees. We were never going to have offices, and we were never going to take on debt because we had taken on a lot of debt in that process. And unfortunately, I had to declare bankruptcy because of it because we took on so much debt. So, that was not a pleasant or proud moment in my life.
I remember someone telling us that it's better if you're doing, what was the phrase they used, but basically if you're the one turning the wrench. And that was one
Yeah.
of the issues we had too, because we really didn't know anything about cars. So if they needed repairs, we had to pay someone else to do them. And then we turned, from the virtual lot to the physical lot to a repair shop. And then we had employees and we had, debt and that type of thing. And it just was not pleasant. But we did pretty well sticking with those three things moving forward, no debt, no employees, no office. We actually started to move forward in our next business, and we adhered to quite a bit of that for quite a while.
We did, and I'm really proud to say we made it through the next venture that we had that was much more successful, by the way. We made it through that one, and we kept the no debt rule. We never borrowed any money, and that meant that we sometimes grew a little bit slower, but it also meant that we didn't amplify my mistakes in particular, because of course I'm the quintessential optimist about how great things are going to work out, and when they don't always work out that well, and when you in the first business, when we borrowed hundreds of thousands of dollars and they didn't work out, then we were truly in one of those oh crap spots because we borrowed tons of money and it didn't work out. And as we started Valor Circle, the agency that we started a few years later, when we didn't have that, we grew slower. The first few years, we had much slower growth because of that, but we were able to sleep at night because we worked off a cash flow. And we found out that, at least for us, and I'm not saying it's always this case, but for us, the level of stress that changed made that business far more palatable and candidly meant that we got paid more frequently than what we would have had we had debt. I know when you borrow money, there's money there to pay yourself too, but you're still digging a hole. And when we weren't digging that hole, I think what it did for me is it forced me to reconcile every week the direction we were doing and the things we were doing, because if what I tried for that week didn't make us money, I didn't have 6 months worth of cash to go, oh, it'll work out down the road. We literally had to make money the next week because we had mortgage payment due.
Now, certainly with the second venture, we did a little bit of pre-planning. And one of those things that we did is we tried to we moved kind of in the middle between those two
Yeah.
businesses, and we tried to really keep our costs low. So the house
Yes.
that we purchased, I remember we specifically purchased a house that we could pay for the mortgage if only one of us was working, and we
Yes.
could be working essentially delivering pizzas in the evening on top of our regular job and be able to afford that house. And I think that was really an epiphany for us, and it really set us up for success later because we weren't worrying so much about the money then. And that helped us get by also on those lean times with the next business where we didn't always make enough to pay ourselves, because
Right.
we did eventually obviously get employees and they got paid, but we did not pay ourselves when it was tight. So setting
Yeah.
ourselves up for that next business, just preparing to make sure that one of us was working full time, the other one went into the business, that we had a house we could afford with only one of us working. Those were key things to ensure that we didn't have the physical stress, the mental stress, the financial stress on us that we had with that first business. So I'm very grateful that we learned some important lessons that first time, but I want other people to know, please learn from some of our lessons and do some preparation before you start that business.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I definitely had very rose-colored glasses on the first time I started a business, and I thought this is going to be easy because, of course, I'd been in sales and had been successful there, and I thought, that went well. This business is going to go well, and as I think most of us with the employer that we're working with, we can see things that we thought they could have done a better job at. And even though I wasn't selling used cars, and in fact, I needed to make a complete change at the time because I was worried the career I was in, had I stayed in that, I would have had a non-compete issue. And so I switched industries and did all of that type of stuff. But you're absolutely right. We didn't do anywhere near enough planning, and that's mainly on my part, didn't do near enough planning to make sure that we were set up to succeed in that and to plan for some of life's eventualities that may or may not happen. And I think, you mentioned the house, and I think that was a really big thing. When we had the auto dealership, we had met, actually I had purchased, and it was the house I'd had before we met, but the mortgage on that house was super expensive. It was one that was probably too expensive for the job that I had in corporate America, let alone too expensive when you're trying to start a business. And it really quickly became this anchor around us because there was this massive amount of mortgage we had to pay every month. And it was a beautiful house and beautiful land and all that. But at least I quickly came to resent that house and resent that property and everything that it embodied because it was such a painful experience. And when we went through some changes and then came back and said, all right, we're going to do this again, you're right. I remember sitting there talking about, okay, worst comes to worst, if this business is a total failure, I can go deliver pizzas for Domino and I can make enough money that we can pay the mortgage. Mm-hmm. And that may sound like a weird discussion, but I literally remember having that discussion between the two of us that, one of us with a job would be able to, it'd be a push, but be able to make that mortgage payment, be able to pay the bills. We wouldn't have to be in that spot where we were literally digging deeper every month into debt. And yeah, that meant a much smaller house, but even looking back, I would take that house on Sierra that we bought over the house we had on Osthoff Woods 100 times over because there was so much less stress in that home than there had been in the other, all due to finances.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's amazing the stress we put on ourselves, and I don't know if it's uniquely American or if it's a global issue, but we see these things that we want, and just because the bank says you can have that, here's what the payment will be, at least for a time, that was so inflated so that, we could have bought a much bigger house, but I don't want to be house poor and beholden to that house.
Right.
And feeling the stress of that house because it's just not worth not being able to sleep well at night or going on anxiety medicine from panic attacks. It's not worth that. And so we really lowered our expectations down of what we were going to get. And I was very comfortable with that. And I think you were too, because we could have something less, but not have all of that weight financially.
Yeah, it was such a huge difference. That again, I just think I was ignorant. I didn't know any better at the time. And of course, I was young and dumb and thought I knew everything and thought this is going to be really easy and didn't realize how difficult business can be and the parts related to that.
Well, and in the state of Michigan, I think car dealerships are incredibly difficult and just wrought with regulation and paperwork. And wow, we couldn't have picked a worse one, I think, for just that kind of weight on us. That was really tough. But then you made a significant change with the next business that you founded, because generally you're the one coming up with the ideas and founding the business, and then I jump in and help you run those. But the next one big change was that you really took something that you were passionate about, that you enjoyed, and that you did have a lot of experience in, and that was building websites. And that business started off a lot different than the previous business did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember, we didn't start cold. I had been selling and working for another web design company, and it was fortuitous looking back. I thank God for it that in the process, the company I was working for, they only wanted at the time what I considered to be large websites and or fairly large websites. And I remember going to the owner and go, look, I'm out selling these websites and I'm stumbling over people all day long in businesses that want less expensive websites. You don't want those. And he's like, nope, this is our minimum. We're not going to sell anything for less than this amount. And I just asked him, do you mind if I start a sideline business and I take some of those? Because I'm literally stepping over dozens of those. And he's like, you'll never make any money at it, but go ahead. And so we did. And the real benefit to that came about 9 months later. We came to an impasse, the owner and I did, over some commissions, but we'd been doing that long enough that we already had, without even really trying, had almost built up enough income to replace what I was making selling websites. And so it was a relatively easy transition to step out of that job that had a salary and everything else associated with it and step into our own business, because we'd already essentially been moonlighting. And I want to be clear, I did it with my employer's permission, nothing behind the scenes, but I'd been moonlighting and built that business up part-time. It reminded me a lot, and at the time I didn't know anybody here, but it reminded me a couple years later, we had actually met, I don't know if it was later, but anyway, in the process, we'd got to meet one of the founders of Two Men in a Truck. And in that process, I remember learning that Two Men in a Truck, which I now know they have sold, but is still, I believe, one of the largest moving companies in the world, had actually started because the two brothers that started it worked at UPS delivering packages and in the warehouse to make money to pay the bills, while they then on the nights and weekends went out and moved people to start building that business. And it was one of those revelations to me. I kind of had thought with the first business, oh, we're just going to be able to step out of a paying job, step into this, and money will start flowing in. And wow, I couldn't have been more wrong. And the second time when we had that opportunity to build that business part-time up to a level that we could go, okay, there's actually enough. We validated it, and we were able to get to the point of an income that it was able to replace most of what I was making in my job. It made that transition much, much easier.
Well, and at that time, we had the affordable house. We had already decided before that we were going to buy cars outright and not pay a car payment. Now, that, folks,
Yes.
doesn't mean we were buying BMWs outright. These were, $1,000 cars, that were essentially junkers, but maybe slightly better than that. But we
Only
had
slightly.
our financial status was much calmer. It was much easier. It was something we could afford and handle. Plus, I was working full time. So those two things, and then you basically working two jobs in a sense as you were working your regular job and then building the new business. It just then, when the change was able to happen, it was very smooth and a good flow. So you left your job, you started full-time with Valor Circle, building that, but we still didn't have an office, we still didn't have employees, we were working in the basement.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was a cold basement because I remember the
I
cement
remember
wall
that, yes.
in front of us, and my hands freezing, working on a lifetime table with a couple computers. I think we had invested in a Mac.
We
What
had.
what are the desktop Macs called? They're not
And
MacBooks. They're
we'd bought an iMac at the time, yeah.
Thank you. Yep. So we had this beautiful iMac. So we had already had enough profit. We could build, buy that iMac. And then we worked in the basement I should say, you worked in the basement at first. I started to help you a little bit with some of just the finances, recording some of the bookkeeping and that type of thing. But then we got to a point where I could actually quit my job and stay home part-time with our 4-year-old son and work for you part-time. And that was a really big blessing for both of us. So just that little bit of planning and not getting into debt, not having an office, not having employees at that time was a huge benefit for us.
Oh yeah, it made a massive difference, and that business is still ongoing. Neither of us own it any longer. That business has been sold. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the fact that we can look back and go, okay, that business started in 2010. We're recording this in 2025, and that is still an ongoing entity that you were able to ultimately sell as an asset is just an amazing thing, because it did great things for our life. Not that everything was cherries. There were definitely some pits along the way, as happens when you own a business. But overall, as we look at the entire picture, it was an incredible blessing and a great opportunity for us for nearly 12 12 to 15 years, depending on which one of us we take a look at.
Right, exactly. I do think that it's important to note that it made us enough money that we could live. We didn't have, expensive cars and expensive
No.
stuff. I mean, I'm not complaining at all. I was very, very comfortable and very happy. But I didn't have to have granite countertops in the kitchen. I didn't have to
Yes.
have some of those perks. So it was just nice to have that flexibility and the freedom that we felt being entrepreneurs, where when you work for someone else, taking a sick day, taking a vacation, staying home with a sick child, that can be kind of painful, but it worked out much better. And so I know I personally did it for the freedom that it afforded
Hmm.
me and being able to stay with our son, who then I ended up homeschooling for many years while I was working for our company. That was so much more important to me. So I think building a business, really identifying what you're looking for to gain out of that business, what values you have, and what your mission is really in that business, I think is really critical. So especially if you're working with a spouse, like we worked together for more than a decade, it's important to have those things talked out and understood before you move forward. But even once we were in Valorous Circle, we had a lot of changes. We had to pivot when things weren't working so well.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the type of business it was, in that it was more project oriented to start with?
Yeah, so when we began Valor Circle, it was building websites. I had been selling websites, and I had learned a fair bit about how to build them. And we had a unique angle at that time, back in 2010, when we started, and that was we focused on the marketing aspect of it, not the development aspect. And we did that largely because that was my background, but also because I had seen at the time in 2010, most of the people building websites were not marketing people, they were developers. And as a result, a lot of the websites that they built worked just great, but they weren't particularly effective for the businesses because they'd been designed by a developer that didn't necessarily care about color combinations and contrasts and where the buttons were put and how to do things in a way that made sense. Designers did that, but generally developers were building websites. And so we began in that process. And like you said, it was very project oriented. When we would sell a website, we'd be great. We'd have money coming in and it'd be fantastic. And generally those projects took a couple of months to complete. So for a couple of months, there'd be good revenue. But then all of a sudden there wouldn't be another project, and then we'd be back in that starvation mode, that desert of, uh-oh, there's no money. And so because it was project, we found that on an annual basis, we did okay. Sometimes we did great, sometimes we did only okay. But the hard part was during the year, because there would be months when we wouldn't take paychecks because there was no money. And then we'd have a great month and we'd go, okay, we can get caught up. But that still caused a lot of stress in the process, because there were still those months when you're like, okay, I think I'm going to sell another project. I hope I'm going to sell another project. I've always sold another project. And whew, okay, I sold another project. But that changed the way in which we did things, because it was stressful. And I don't remember what year it was, but I remember we had over the years grown, and we'd finally hit that magical agency number that so many agencies talk about, of we'd become a 7-figure agency, meaning we'd build over $1 million that year in revenue. Now, let me be clear, that didn't mean you and I didn't make $1 million to those people
Right.
listening, but our revenue had exceeded $1 million. And I remember we looked at each other and we're like, I'm tired. That was so much work. And we knew in order to do it again, it was going to be just as much work as it had been the year before, because you're essentially starting over every year. There wasn't recurring revenue coming in. I mean, there's a little bit, but very little, not even enough to really pay for our basic needs if we had closed down. I mean, there wasn't much recurring revenue. So everything was kind of feast or famine. Feast when you sold projects, famine in between, hoping you were going to sell the next. And we decided we needed to do something different, because kind of like we decided between the used car dealership and Valorous, this isn't what we want to repeat. While we were earning money, it was a stressful time, and we said we wanted to make some changes. And so we did. You want to tell everybody kind of about the changes that we made at that point?
Sure. Well, we actually found a agency that actually helped agencies like ours establish essentially a monthly recurring revenue. So we changed our model from these project-based websites to websites with marketing, heavier on the marketing as usual, that would pay us on a monthly basis. So the website was woven in there, but we were paid less upfront, but then we had monthly revenue that would come in. So the first couple months, we would get the website done, we'd get the website up, then the marketing would begin, and then we would have this marketing package, and we would continue to provide marketing services for as long as that client would then stay with us. And the hope was is they would stay with us, a year, 2, 3 years, so on, and that you would build more and more of these clients up, so that you might be doing heavier lifting at the beginning when we're building the website, but once the marketing started, it would be a little lighter lifting and more just regular work. And that was just revolutionary for us because
Oh,
it
yeah.
away all of those valleys, peaks and valleys that we were experiencing, and gave us more of a streamlined ongoing revenue. And it was very helpful. And one of the things I noticed that happened kind of naturally, at this time we did have an office, we did have
Yep.
employees. So I just want to say we went back on those 2 points. We still did not take on any debt, which was a
Correct.
beautiful thing. And I wouldn't change that for the world. But what we had to do then is, as we started here with our legacy work, we're going to call it, so our project work, we were way up here, and then our monthly recurring revenue work was here, and we're talking about financially now. So let's just say we made, $100,000 in a month, and we were that 100,000 legacy, zero of the monthly recurring revenue. What happened is as we built the monthly recurring revenue, the legacy started to decline, and they got to a point where they kind of met each other, and then the monthly revenue was higher. And then when we finally hit that 7 figures with the monthly revenue, and that's 7 figures annually, with
Right.
the monthly, we were so excited because our budget was less than that. And so that was huge. Now we varied, but we almost always had at least 8 employees, and they were also American based, US based. So the per employee, the cost was higher than if you have offshore employees. That was another change we kind of made later on. But it was a beautiful thing, and we really felt like we had made it at that point.
It is. It had removed so much of the drama and the stress from it because yes, we still needed to close new business and we still needed to add new sales, but we knew going into the month that, we had a baseline of revenue that was going to be coming in that month. And we'd done a really good job of making sure that our baseline budget was below what that baseline revenue was, so that, maybe we're not buying a new computer this month that we'd really like to get, or maybe we're not going to upgrade something that we want to upgrade, but we didn't have to do any of that. Those were choices that were easy to make. And I think probably for the first time ever, you and I didn't have weeks throughout the year or months throughout the year that we didn't get paid. And that had been
Yeah.
part of running a business. Had been, again, on an annual basis. We'd always done decently, but we'd had times when it's like, okay, I remember there was a period of time it's like, Jonathan, you have enough blow money each week to go buy a soda each day, because I was out on the road, and that's all the blow money you've got because we're tight right now. And I remember the occasional, other than putting gas in the car, you don't have any money this week, discussions that we had. Excuse me, I have the hiccups, because that fluctuating revenue had went back and forth. And again, we
Mhm.
tried to balance it out, but it was unpredictable. And that
Right.
recurring revenue model made it that we could go, okay, now we're in a spot where we can manage our finances better, balance them better, and as a result, create a better work balance, not only for ourselves, but I think for our staff too, because you and I were much less stressed at that point, and there's no doubt that that rolled over as a benefit onto our team.
Absolutely. The After that, we didn't go without a paycheck. And that was a beautiful thing. We knew we had that paycheck coming in. And that was definitely helpful just to our day life. In our marriage, that was less stress.
Hmm.
Obviously, working together, and I would always say we worked alongside each other because although we collaborated a lot together, we each had our own lane, so to speak. So,
Yeah, we definitely
we
learned that early on in the
really
first
figured
business.
that out. Yeah.
I had to learn it probably more than you, but yes, I remember learning that the hard way.
Yes, yes. So we had done that as well. So things really started to come together in just a really beautiful way. One other thing I want to say about that recurring revenue model is that we also niched down. So that was
Yes.
also a big change, and that we found one industry that we were going to sell websites to, and then we were sticking with that one industry. That really increased the efficiencies, and we had some, this is going to sound awful, but templated websites that we had available. They'd be branded and there'd be changes
Right.
made to them so they didn't look identical by any means, but a lot of the base work was done and then reproduced, which just saved a lot of time. And then when COVID came along, we had another change, and that was
Mm.
basically that we went remote. And we went remote initially because we had to. But what was interesting is that we actually came back from COVID and we chose to go remote, lessening some of our monthly costs because then we didn't have an office to pay for some of the supplies and coffee and heat and electricity that we'd have with that office. And so we saved more money there, but we then, and I want to just point out, I really was concerned when we went remote with COVID that we weren't going to have the productivity. But I don't know how it was for other people, but in our case, our developers, our salespeople, they all really, our marketers, they did a great job working
They
from home.
did.
And
Yeah, they
I
did.
was pleasantly impressed, and we had a great team. And so going on with that was just a no-brainer. Okay, let's get rid of the office and we'll work virtually. Well, then working virtually, that allowed us to make another change, and that was that we could start working with people that were outside of the US. And so as our American workers would leave just for lots of different
Take
reasons,
another,
like
yeah,
being
take another
married,
job, get a
taking another
whatever. Yep.
job, I mean all sorts of different reasons, we would then replace them with people from other countries, and we ended up picking kind of South Africa because of the cultural similarity uh,
Yeah.
to us, and we just saved a lot of money that way, quite frankly.
Well, and even more, not that saving money wasn't important, but it gave us more flexibility. It gave us the opportunity to have maybe 50% more staff to help cover our client
Yes.
needs and to take care of things where in the past, well, there were a lot of times when we were two or three people probably under where we should have been as far as a team because we
Yes.
just didn't have the money to have enough bodies in place with enough skill sets to do that. And I think that's one of the things of moving to global staff that has really changed is yes, in some ways it saves money, but it also did two things for us because the other thing that at least I found during COVID, or at least coming out of COVID, it seemed that when we'd go to hire in the US that everyone that had a job already, or everybody that wanted a job already had one. And the people that we're interviewing, even though there were definitely people interviewing, that most of them weren't really that interested in having a job. And we won't get into all the politics of the money they made during COVID and all that, but it was a really hard time, at least in the US, to find people that were willing to show up on time, that were
Mm-hmm.
willing to actually do their job, that
Work.
were actually work. And again, because we were remote, I think one of the things that was different when we went remote in COVID, everybody had been in the office. And so we'd already had a fairly close knit team. Everybody
Yes.
knew each other. And then when we went remote, we still had those connections. Because we stayed remote, it made it really hard to find people that would then actually do their job during the day. Not that people wouldn't, but most of those people already had jobs.
Right.
They were already happily working. So that part became very difficult for us. And the global staff, I think, allowed us, one, to find more people that were used to working remotely because we learned that that's not at all uncommon. For example, the staff that we have in South Africa, many of them prior to us even worked for American companies and worked remote. So they're used to it. It's part of that lifestyle for them. And in that case, it worked out because yes, they were less expensive on a per hour basis, and that allowed us to have more resources to better serve our clients, to better bring value to the audience that we were trying to serve, and candidly to do some things in the business that maybe we hadn't been able to do before because we were always kind of on that, we need two more people but we don't have the money because we didn't borrow
Right.
money.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was based on cash flow, and it's like, no, we don't have enough money to bring that person on. We'd really like to, we really should, but there's not enough cash to do that. And that changed obviously to a large extent when we went with a global workforce.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That reminds me back. Those are excellent points, Jonathan, and I'm glad you brought all of those up. It reminds me back when we were doing the project model and we had all of those, ebbs and flows. We were able to bring on new employees, and I mean add to our head count, bring on new
Hmm.
employees because we would close a big deal.
Oh
And
yeah.
so it was wonderful to bring on some of the employees that we brought in. Man, we had a great team. I loved
Oh
working
yeah.
with them. It was really wonderful. It's just very different now, obviously, but we didn't have to worry about that as much when we went to the recurring revenue because I didn't have to worry that, oh, we brought this person on. Now this
Hmm.
deal is over. Are we going to continue to have enough business coming in to
Correct.
continue to pay them? So I just love the recurring revenue model. I love the remote. It's certainly always been something that I've enjoyed doing. I like working from home. It allows me to go throw laundry in, between podcasts and, be able to do other things like, cook meals for our son and that type of thing in between some of the work. So I love that as well. But it's just so different now. We certainly had then Valorous Circle. At that point, I'd been running it for several years, and I kind of felt like you were starting to get a little bored with it. That it was kind of, you didn't have the flexibility to do some new things and think out of the box because as the business got bigger, there had to be more, SOPs and protocols and guidelines to follow. And you had kind of been, I don't know, you're a little bit of a maverick, a little bit of a rogue, doing things your own way on the spur of the moment. And that started to cause more problems as we got bigger. And so I started to hear you becoming just longing, yearning for something a little bit different. And then we were able to do that. You want to talk about that transition?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt as we grew, my ADD-ness became a bit of a problem because, I'm a pleaser. So somebody would call and want something done, and I know how to do that. I just take care of it. The problem is I didn't take care of it the same way that the rest of the team took care of it. And so a month or 2 months later, when there'd be an issue that would come up, the team would get in and go, "What the heck did we do?" And they'd, "Oh, Jonathan, get it." And then they'd have to redo that and everything else. So it ended up causing a lot more work. And it's not that I didn't believe in following those protocols, but in the spur of the moment when I was doing things, I was more interested in getting things done than following protocol. And that absolutely caused problems with the team. And the team was great about it. They accepted it, but I didn't want to be that, "Oh, Jonathan did that" guy either. And so that started to cause just less fun for me in the business because I wasn't able to be that maverick, so to speak, that I was. And, that was about the time that AI came out. And one of the things being an ADD entrepreneur, as you know, Beth, I have the ability to hyper focus for about 15 to 20 minutes. And that means I can get an hour's work or worse done in 15 to 20 minutes. The problem is that after that, I'm probably useless for anywhere from 40 minutes to 4 hours. It just depends on what my brain gets sidetracked on during that time. And so AI really, what was so amazing about it is it allowed me to get so much more done in that 15 to 20 minutes that my brain didn't get ahead of where I was and get bored. Because that's really what would
Hmm.
happen is I would just get bored and I'd go, "I don't have any more time for this. I'm bored with it." And
Right.
AI allowed me to do things fast enough that I didn't get bored as quickly. And so now, one, I could still probably only focus for 15 to 20 minutes, but in that process, I could get 4 to 5 times more stuff done. And then I didn't feel like I was bored at the end because things had happened so quickly that I might only need 10 or 15 minutes to go before I could get my next burst. And I really decided I wanted to teach people how to do that because it had been just life changing for me. And it was kind of like this light bulb went off after 50 some years. All of a sudden, oh my gosh, there's a tool that I can use that amplifies my ADD in a good way. It really does make it my superpower. And so thankfully, the business was at a point that it was a good time. I remember talking to the team, and I'll never forget, we had a leadership team meeting, and we're talking about some of what my thoughts were. And when the leadership team looked at me and said, "This is a good time for you to leave." Part of it was, oh my gosh, my kids just told me I need to move out of the house. But the other part was, okay, we've built something now that I didn't need to be there anymore. You did, unfortunately. You had to stick with it for a little bit longer. But it did. It allowed us to make a pivot and then gave me that flexibility to start another new company doing something that I love. And now taking all those lessons that we learned at Valorous Circle and pulling those in. And I think the difference with Whitebeard Strategies, my current company, is that you and I talk through that. Even though it's my company and it's my gig, we really talk through what things Jonathan wanted, what things I needed to build a company around my strengths, and believe it or not, one that accepted all of my weaknesses. And while that doesn't mean life is perfection, Whitebeard Strategies is now up to 5 employees. It's not, I don't want more employees, but as we need them, we get them. But the difference is that I've learned which people to hire so much better than I'd learned when I was at Valorous Circle. When I was at Valorous Circle, I always tried to hire people that knew what I knew because I had to learn the hard stuff, and I figured it was best for me to learn the hard stuff. I've now learned that there are actually people that know how to do all that hard stuff, like operations and paperwork and stuff, that drive me nuts. And they don't like to do what I do. So if I hire people that are really good at that have experience, they're going to do a better job at that than I could ever dream of. And it removes like 90% of the stress in my life because I now get to work in what I call my circle of genius. And so does everybody else on the team. When we focus it so that every team member is really working in their circle of genius, the work that we all do is so much easier and it's so much more impactful and effective. So yeah, Valorous was great because it gave me that opportunity, and I had that opportunity to go do that without having to necessarily make a paycheck day one.
I just have to throw in there for any of my beloved team watching this that it was not unfortunate that I had to stay with Valorous while
I
Jonathan.
said that wrong. No, that's true. That is very true. No, it was not unfortunate.
I didn't see it that way at all. I was rather giddy, actually, to get him out of the house. So that was good. But the recent changes, then I went on about a year later to sell Valorous Circle, which was a God thing. And you developing the business you have, it's been another chapter in our lives with changes, but they've been good changes. And I love the fact that, God gives us experience so that we can gain this wisdom and then use it when we're older. Wisdom makes up for the lack of age, or the abundance of age, maybe I should say. And so we've had just a phenomenal journey, and I'm so grateful for it. And I'm really excited about seeing where it takes us. But holding to some of those basic principles, like not going into debt and, being flexible and adaptable to be able to pivot your business model. I think it's just critical to a successful business because very seldom do you start with one idea and does it stay that idea? It's going to evolve and change.
Oh, yeah.
I think as entrepreneurs, we need to embrace that. Be careful with it because sometimes we can go too far in a direction or another. But it's just a wonderful thing to be an entrepreneur, and I personally feel extremely blessed to be on this path.
No question about it. And even with Whitebeard Strategies, we've made some pivots, not necessarily 180-degree pivots, but the things that I thought we would be doing that would be generating revenue and we're growing are ironically now not things that are a major part of the business. It's evolved and pivoted enough, and we've learned along the way responding to our audiences while still staying in our lane we've modified some of the things that we had assumed. Like most of us, when we start a business, we make some assumptions, and sometimes you find out that those weren't perfect assumptions. And so you need to make some pivots. You need to maybe change. You're on the same highway, but you're changing the lane you're in, or whatever you're doing, or that type of thing. And that ability to do so and learning that that's part of the process, I think, has been really instrumental for the growth of the business at this current chapter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for taking this time to chat with me about that and just kind of remember some of those phenomenal experiences that we have at the time. Some of them were kind of painful, but they brought good change and good growth, and it's been quite the journey.
No doubt. Well, thank you for being on that journey with me, because without it, it would have been a very different journey and far less pleasant, I'm convinced.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You want to close this out today?
Let's do it. Well, thank you for listening to us as we chat about business and lessons learned and where things are at. We so appreciate you guys hanging out with us. And if there's topics you'd like to know about, again, I hope you can tell, we're pretty transparent about the successes and the failures that we've had, and we've had both. If there's questions you've got, let us know. We'd love to respond, and we'd certainly appreciate it if you'd give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the podcast. That'd mean the world to us. With that, make it a great day, everybody, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.